Okay, our next operation is going to be to taper the legs. Now, we've got a taper jig we designed some years ago. If you go to my website, which is www.charlesneilwoodworking.com, if you scroll to the bottom, right down here, it says Project Videos. Right down next to the bottom, it says Taper Jig. If you go to that, and you come over here and look, there's going to be two. There's a project, there's a video on it. As well, you can pull up all the plans and everything, how to build it. Whoops, PieSafe. By the way, that's where the PieSafe that we're doing, that's where all the SketchUps and stuff are. But anyway, down here is here it is. Wasn't quite down far enough. You will see all the patterns, plans, and everything to make the taper jig we're going to be using. Or you can make your own version. But it works really nice, and a lot of the things that it's totally free, and a lot of the things we've been looking at, you'll find it helps, particularly cutting angles, tapers, and things of that nature. So check it out. While you're out here, if you have an interest, you're going to see right here, here's a general forum that we have, and if you go to it, what you're going to see is a grumpy looking skinny me out there, and it's a forum, again, totally free, and if you look down right here, where is it at? We've got the PieSafe in here. Right here, 1210 PieSafe project, questions and comments. If you have any questions or anything on it, this is the place to take it. Again, you have to sign up for it, but again, it's totally free. All right, let's get to the table saw and see how we cut these. Okay, here's the jig. Essentially what happens is this jig runs in the right miter slide. You can also do it where it runs up against the fence. Here's the way it works. We have a set of cams on here, or stops, however how you want to do it, that position the post or the leg, whatever you're cutting, so that it cuts remember that little straight line jig we were doing? Sort of similar, except we have a hold down. And it cuts right on the edge of the platform. So this is our point of no return. In other words, this is the point that blade is tracking. Okay, what we have to do, first thing I need to do is drop down my mount feet. Okay. In the case of the leg, what we've done, we went from the bottom of our mortise, or where our rail will be going, and I dropped down 1 inch, and I drew a line. On this one, I came in 1 inch, drew a line. Now to set this up, all I have to do, go up against the stop, set the 1 inch line on the edge of the jig, come back to the 1 inch line below where the rail will be, and align it to the edge. That gives me my taper. I lock it down. Now, orientation will tell me that if I cut this side first, then when I rotate it, I'm still going to have a good flat surface. If I cut this side first, when I go down, I'm going to be elevated. So pay attention to that. So we want to cut. Now, which side do the tapers go on? It's very simple. The sides that have the mortises get the tapers, no others. It's a two-sided taper. You know, a lot of guys up there have made these and they use toggle clamps and all kind of different hold downs. We've got these out there. These are just made from some aluminum that we got and bent in a vise, and we bought it at the hardware store. Again, it's a jig you can make very easily, very inexpensively, and again, as far as the taper jig goes, I don't know of anything any safer. You've seen them metal, I don't know if you guys have seen them metal ones that open up. No way, not me. This keeps me out of harm's way. You know, you can go through a set of tapered legs for like a shaker table or something, especially if you got a bunch of them. Man, you can just fly. Now the cams give us an index point. We just keep indexing from the same point and just keep cutting. Now, why the inch? Well, actually just a little below it. The reason for this is we want room to sand up to and get our any saw marks out. Now, is there an alternative to this? Sure there is. You could draw this out, bandsaw it, and setting your joiner very, very low. Setting the joiner very low, you could take this and pass it across the joiner. But make sure you leave that line. Leave you some room there. You could also draw it out, bandsaw it, take a hand plane and clean it. Take a random orbit sander, sand it to the line. You know, not difficult. All right, we've got 4 more posts to taper. And again, I want to remember, the taper goes only on the sides that have the mortises. Okay? Okay. This is a point. Legs are tapered, and we did another dry fit. This time with clamps. The only thing missing is the glue. Just to be sure. Now, one of the things I like to do, because, you know, when you're laying out and you're measuring all of this stuff and you're trying to get everything in here and together, if you've got a little bit of play in there, which you should a little bit, because you may have to scoot your move just a little, and a little being a 16th or so. If you get a little bit more than that, don't worry about it. I like to do story sticks. What is a story stick? Well, here's what we got. If you take a look very carefully, first thing I did was I assembled the top panel. Make sure everything is flush, the top. Then these are just little pieces of MDF that are cut at 9 inches. That's to be our opening. And as you can see, they create the story. And all I have to do when I glue this up is keep these in the middle, align everything to it. That way I know all of my openings are exactly 9 inches. I don't have to be trying to mess with glue and tape measures and all of that. Additionally, when I use a clamp on it, I'm not going to take a chance of racking or twisting anything around and out of position. Everything's going to come in nice and straight and where we want it. Now once this step is done, now comes something you really, really need to do. And this is where a lot of woodworkers make a mistake. See where that one's a little bit loose? I'll make sure it comes up nice and tight when we clamp it. Woodworkers get so involved in the building process, they don't think about the finishing process. Those of us who make a living doing woodworking understand something, and that what we understand is that the finishing process starts from minute one. This is the point in time where you want to sand the insides of your post. You want to sand all the edges of your rails. The outside, don't worry about that, because we can access that once it's assembled. What we're after is the areas we can't get to very easily. Again, the insides of these posts, along these edges. Once this piece is in this post, and we've got a post edge here, and we've got this flat surface, to be able to get to this surface and sand it is going to be very difficult. So now's the time to do it. As well as these edges and whatever. Now you can, if you're good with the random orbit, you can sand them with the random orbit. My preference is a little sanding block, just to get any saw marks or mill marks out. Here's another thing you want to do. You want to ease the edges. I'm not talking about these edges here where it's going to be butting the post. We don't want to do that. Easing the edges means you want to round them a little bit. For the poplar pie safe, we want to go to 180. We don't need to go any further. And make sure so now what we want to do is you want to get all your sanding done, get everything cleaned up. Again, I really want to reemphasize, the sanding you're after is what you're not going to be able to access once it's assembled. This is also a good time to clean up your tapers. Using a scraper, random orbit. Be careful when you're sanding the areas that your rails are going to be butting into. If you sand them too much, you can maybe not get a nice tight joint here. So again, a little block sand, long strokes up and down it is a good idea. Okay, sand it. Next step will be glue it, peg our joints. Then we're going to need to make our rails to bring it together to form our carcass. Okay, we've got everything sanded and we're ready to do a glue up. Before we do, there's always a big controversy about what do you do about glue squeeze out? Do you wipe it off or do you try to chisel it off? Well, about as long as it is short. Yeah, the theory is that if you use a wet rag to wipe it off, does it push it into the fibers of the wood? Usually a little bit, yeah. But when we get to the finishing process, we'll show you how to find that. But one of the better ways I found of doing it is to glue it and let the glue semi-set up. And depending on the glue you're using, that could be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Where the glue is not wet, it kind of solidifies. And then just take a sharp chisel and peel it off. But a lot of guys, particularly in home environments, they're going to glue something up in the evening or whatever after work. and they don't have an hour or two to hang around to wait for glue to dry. And trust me, sitting there watching it dry is not a lot of fun. Anyway, so what happens if you get dried glue? That can be a bear. Here's a little quick trick. If we zoom in here, this is just a glue up panel. This is just a panel glued up, that's all. But we've got glue here. And yeah, you can take a scraper and scrape this off on a panel like this, but what if it's around our mortises or in here where it's, where we want to keep it clean? This is a heat gun. Hot hair dryer usually do about the same thing. Warm the glue. And the other thing is, you can tape this off to prevent glue, the squeeze out from getting on there. With some tape, that's a good idea. But sometimes even if you get that glue squeeze out, and the glue dries, the tape don't want to come off. Again, get your heat gun or hair dryer. Watch what happens. When I warm the glue, doesn't take but a little bit. Now, this particular panel's probably been sitting around here drying for a week or more. But the first thing you see is how pliable the glue becomes. About like chewing gum. And how much now you see here where I didn't warm it? When I go to chisel it, even with a good sharp chisel, a good glue, it can try to pull a little bit of the surface. If you warm it, not the case. Comes off a lot easier. See how much harder it is where I didn't warm it? Just a little tip to help you get dry glue. Okay. Before we glue this, I want to show you another little trick. Okay, now this is simple. What we've got is just a little L-shaped piece of MDF here clamped to the bench. And we've got everything laid out with our spacers. Now, we talked about dry fitting, and you want to do that. But if you lay this out where we've got these tight tenons, and we don't want to be beating and banging on our posts and stuff to get them apart, if you look right here, you can see what this little piece of MDF does. It allows me to push everything together and everything up tight. So I've got a visual reference of how everything's going to go together. And if you look right here, you can see that tenon is just a little bit wide right there at the top. So I know to chisel a little bit off. If I don't, what's going to happen when I put it together, I'm going to have a little gap. Well, it's not going to really be a gap, it's just my distance is going to be off a little bit. So this gives me a visual reference of how it's going to go together. Now, again, that's in this application in the pie safe, I mean, we're doing a ladder here. What if you were doing something similar where you've got multiple, rails going across? It's kind of a neat idea, and it works really well to show you, make sure everything's in line. Okay, I'm going to clean that up, and we're going to do some gluing. The other thing, one last thing before we start applying glue. One of the things I like to do is just take a little hand plane and just touch the edge of my tenon. All I want to do is just put a little bit of an angle on it. Why? It gives me glue relief. What is that? Everybody knows what something hydraulic is. Fluid under pressure. And, there's a lot of things work off of it. It's an extremely strong animal. You get too much glue in here and you clamp this thing up, you're creating a hydraulic pressure. You can actually split and crack wood doing it. So what you want to do, that just gives you a little bit of relief. That's all it's about. And also what you want to do is, if your tenons are fitting properly, is it doesn't take a ton of glue. I like to paint everything. And it's exactly what it implies. I'm simply going to paint it. Now in our case, we're also going to be pegging them. Do I have to do that? No. You know, I had the fortune not too long back of going to see the King Tut exhibit. And one of the things I found very interesting in looking at the furniture made by Egyptians was all those peg mortises. They've been around, what now, a couple, 4,000 years? That'll do. I'm not going to warranty it quite that long, but we've been using peg mortise and tenons forever. And not only have we been using them, that's the way it's been done for years, and it isn't broke. So that's good enough for me. But right now all we're going to do is glue it up and we'll be good to go. Now, you know, if you get glue on the outside of this, when like this, that's not a big deal. And the reason that's not a big deal is because we'll be able to get to that, and when we do our final cleanup and sand before finishing, that's the easiest, that'll be the easiest part to remove. Now also, when you're working something like this, you've got a lot of joints. So work quickly. Okay, I'm going to keep gluing and we'll come back and put it together. And you obviously see how the spacers are working out. We don't have to get in here and do a bunch of measuring. Make sure you're nice and flush at the top. Clamp it up. Now, one of the things you want to be careful of when you're clamping. If you get a clamp crooked, you can actually force this side up or that side down. So don't do that. Try to keep your clamps as even as you can going across something, particularly in an assembly. I think the part about using the little cawls to protect your wood is, everybody knows that. You know, a lot of times, actually the clamping process is more about pushing any excess glue than it is anything else. All right, we're together. We'll take a look at it. Okay, it's all clamped up. Now what we want to do is we want to do a diagonal measurement. Measuring from corner to corner and making sure that it's equal. That ensures we're square. What if you're not? Well, you can put a diagonal clamp from corner to corner if you got a big long clamp and, push it until it is. But the other thing you can do is what we talked about just a second ago, is you can actually take these clamps and angle them a little bit, and it'll allow you, particularly in gluing up something like this, that's again like a ladder, and it'll push it one way or the other. Now, after you've clamped it up, go back and check your clamps after just a little bit. If you find they're a little loose, don't be surprised. Because what happens is the glue, like we talked about that hydraulic thing, the glue in there can create a little bit of pressure. And it finds its way out and the pressure's relieved. And by just hitting it a little bit more snug, you don't need them, you don't need to get these super, super tight. Just pull your joint together. That's all you need. If you got to get them super tight, get a big old pipe and put on them and all that, you probably need to check that joint just a little more before you put it together. Okay. Our next step is going to be to cut the little groove that's going to go in here so that we can get our tin in. Now here's one of the tins we're going to be using, and we'll get into more of that later. But the little slot we're going to cut, we're going to do with a wing cutter, and we'll show you what all that is. And this will allow us to flex the tin and slide it into one end, into the other, and then we're going to put some little cleats in here to hold it on the rabbets. Makes the tin installation very, very easy. Okay, we got to glue up the other one, and we'll be ready to go to work. Okay, I've had a lot of private messages and emails asking me about the PieSafe mock-up, and if this is something we typically do. In many, many cases it is. This is a slant front desk that we're doing in our online mastering woodworking series. And the top of this, as you can well see, is MDF. And this is where we're just using some MDF, which is relatively inexpensive, to work out all of our logistics and all of our details and get everything so we know exactly how everything is going to work and make sure we kind of get the look we want. As a beginning woodworker, that's a good thing to do. Practicing with junk makes a whole lot of sense. Gives you a feel for it. And so some MDF or some cheap plywood or something is a good way to figure out all your joints and make sure you have everything in your mind and how everything is going to interrelate. Just makes a lot of sense, right? And I just wanted to address that. So my answer to you guys is, yeah, we don't always mock everything up. But if we have a question or we're not sure exactly how we're going to do something, a mock-up's a good way to do it. That's just for your information, and hey, even something like, some cardboard and some tape kind of gives you an idea of what you're doing.